Baldivia. I am the Equity and Outreach Librarian here at Miriam Library, and I will be the moderator for this discussion. Next slide for me. So this is our roadmap for the evening. We are in the introduction portion, and then I will pass the baton to Dr. Gapa to explain the resource curse and the post-curse era in Africa. And then we will be joined by two contributing authors from the book to discuss case studies from their chapters. Next slide, please. As we begin this discussion about resource extraction, we would like to thank the Machupta on whose traditional lands this event is taking place. Without their support and continued positive presence in our community, we would be unable to forward the cultural and educational work that is at the heart of this event. We would further be remiss if we did not acknowledge the vital contributions of Black labor, both enslaved and free, in building and shaping American society. We honor the legacy of the African diaspora and Black life, recognizing the knowledge and skills preserved despite systemic oppression. This acknowledgement honors their legacy and commits to combating racial injustice and the fallacy of white supremacy. Now I would like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Angela Zivo-Gapa is an associate professor of international relations at California State University, Chico. Dr. Michael Hene Oboagwe is the correspondence advisor for the Deputy Minister of Alberta's Public Service Commission in Canada. And Dr. Cliff Uba Cordero is an assistant professor of political science and international affairs at Morgan State University. All three have PhDs in international relations from Florida International University in Miami, Florida. And now, Dr. Gapa, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Stephanie. So good afternoon and good evening, esteemed colleagues, students, and fellow scholars, and other engaged citizens. It's a pleasure to be here today to introduce my edited book, The Politics of New African Resource Discoveries in the Post-Resource Curse Era. This book initially emerged as a panel I convened in 2022 for the International Political Science Association World Congress in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And the panel garnered significant attention, which then culminated in the compendium of chapters, some of which my fellow contributors will be presenting here today. For those who know my scholarly career throughout its lifespan, I've delved deeply into the dynamic and complex intersection of natural resource wealth and political development in Africa. The academic and policy world is currently experiencing a resurgence in the interest in the role of natural resources and how it shapes the economies of African countries. And this comes decades after the coining of the term resource curse by Richard Auty, a concept of what typically manifests in nations abundant in point source non-renewable resources. The resource curse arises from the arbitrary global distribution of strategic natural resources, making some countries notably resource rich and other countries notably resource poor. And despite their global scarcity, these resources, they hold immense value as international traded commodities crucial for the economic growth of both developed and developing nations. And the substantial rent that's generated from possessing these resources significantly fuels political and economic competition. This is further exacerbated by the lack of a world government. So states' relative power and behavior in the international system often wield more influence over the political and economic outcomes of countries rather than regional or international governance institutions or even international law. And one of the significant developments in recent years is the discovery of new economically viable hydrocarbon and mineral deposits across Africa. And these resource discoveries are occurring in countries that are not traditionally resource rich, So from oil and gas finds in countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana, to the development of offshore liquefied natural gas deposits in Tanzania and Mozambique, these resource discoveries are reshaping Africa's geopolitical dynamics and political economies. Um, the surge is largely driven by a global transition towards renewable energy and the subsequent demand for minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, which are crucial for the manufacture of electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines. And Africa is slated to be a potential critical supplier of these resources, offering an alternative to global producers like China. So back to the resource curse, while these new discoveries offer immense economic opportunities, African countries have historically struggled to leverage their natural resource wealth for long-term development. And this resource curse, which is the paradox that countries with an abundance of non-renewable natural resources tend to have negative and worse development outcomes than their resource poor counterparts, manifests in three different ways. The first is that resource-dependent countries tend to experience lower rates of economic growth compared to countries reliant on other sectors like manufacturing or tourism. This is due to the fact that the volatility of commodity prices leads to economic instability and the phenomenon known as the Dutch disease, where resource exports cause a country's currency to appreciate, thereby making other sectors in the economy less competitive. Additionally, resource wealth fuels authoritarianism. In many African countries, revenues from resource exports allow governments to maintain power by distributing rents to loyal supporters, thereby stifling democratic development. This is known as a rentier state, a rentier effect, sorry, and reduces the need for governments to rely on taxation from citizens. And this therefore weakens the accountability of political leaders to their citizens. Furthermore, resource wealth has been linked to violent conflict. A lot of you have probably heard of blood diamonds or conflict diamonds, particularly in regions where valuable resources are alluvial. And civil wars in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, and Sierra Leone have been prolonged by the revenues from resource extraction. However, despite these challenges, there is renewed optimism that African countries may be entering a post-resource curse era. And this optimism is largely fueled by the increasing democratization of knowledge about natural resources, driven by the proliferation of information technology. So with greater access to information about the resource curse and the strategies for overcoming it, African citizens are better equipped to hold their governments accountable, or so is the assumption. We do have countries like Botswana and South Africa that have leveraged their strong institutions and democratic governance in order to mitigate the effects of the resource curse. So one of the key debates that are currently occurring in this context is whether these new resource discoveries in these newly resource-rich countries, whether those countries are able to learn from the mistakes of the traditionally resource-rich countries like Nigeria and Angola and pave a different path. Um, so there's growing recognition for the need for African countries to develop more inclusive and transparent institutions in order to ensure that citizens benefit from their natural resources. With that in mind, the collection of chapters in the book attempts to address a central question. Are we in a post-resource curse era? The further questions that we surveyed through 11 case studies, all from sub-Saharan Africa, are has increased knowledge access altered the incentive structure for leaders in resource-rich countries? Will new resource discoveries offer greater economic promise for poverty alleviation? Or does the political economy still constrain resource development in low-income countries despite citizen feedback? That last question was my main preoccupation when I looked at the case of Mozambique. So in this chapter, my co-author Antonetta Hamandishe and I, we explored the geopolitical dynamics of Mozambique's natural gas discoveries, focusing on how the 100 trillion cubic feet discovery in the Rovuma Basin is poised to transform the country's role in regional and global energy markets. And the implications of this windfall are vast and extend beyond economics, touching on the country's internal governance, regional instability, as well as international competition. Mozambique is strategically located in the southeastern coast of Africa. Its proximity to major shipping routes give it a unique advantage, allowing it to export liquid natural gas across the Indian Ocean to the Asia Pacific, um, circumnavigate the Cape of Good Hope to access markets in the Americas, as well as through the Suez Canal to provide LNG to Europe. So from a geopolitical perspective, Mozambique's gas discoveries could potentially influence regional energy dynamics. There's an increase in global demand for liquid natural gas as a cleaner alternative to oil and coal, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. Mozambique's ability to reliably supply energy to countries like China, Japan, and India could strengthen its international standing, especially as the nation seeks to diversify their sources and reduce their in reliance on the Middle East. And there's keen interest in by multinational corporations like Total, ExxonMobil, Eni, Oil India, which highlights the global competition to secure long-term access to Mozambique's critical resources. So I see Mozambique's gas boom as a crucial component to reshaping energy diplomacy in Africa. One of the countries that it borders is South Africa, which is currently going through an energy crisis with long periods of widespread national blackouts of electricity, known as load shedding. So South Africa imports about 65% of its natural gas from Mozambique due to its limited domestic production. This has implications within the geopolitics of Southern Africa, where we're seeing a shift in regional dynamics. Mozambique now poised to provide more of the energy needs of its landlocked neighbors, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Eswatini. However, the geopolitical threat of the Cabo Delgado insurgency um, threatens all of this. In 2015, the jihadist group Ansar al-Sana, locally referred to as Al-Shabaab, um, began its insurgency in the Cabo Delgado region. This is the region where the Rovuma Basin is located, where the liquid natural gas is found. This jihadist movement is rooted in a combination of radical Islamist ideology and long-standing socio-economic grievances, and has destabilized the region, leading to thousands of deaths and the displacement of 1 million people, highlighting the risks associated with resource wealth, particularly in the marginalized resource enclave of Cabo Delgado, where local populations already feel excluded. So there's a stark socioeconomic disparity between Cabo Delgado and the country's political and economic center, which is Maputo. Cabo Delgado is located about 2,000 miles from the capital. It's both geographically and socially isolated, The population, who are predominantly rural and agrarian, have long suffered from underdevelopment, poverty, and limited infrastructure. And this is combined with the region's linguistic and cultural differences that have fueled a sense of marginalization and exclusion. So the presence of foreign corporations also taking their land in order to invest in these liquid natural gas projects has also exacerbated these tensions. So the discovery of natural gas in Cabo Delgado has been bittersweet for the communities over there. And the insurgency has in turn also disrupted investment. For instance, in 2021, they suspended the LNG operations of Total due to security concerns, underscoring the fragility of Mozambique's resource-based development strategy. The chapter also addresses citizen feedback with all this in mind. And a lot of citizens in Mozambique have resorted to protests. They've expressed growing dissatisfaction with how natural gas projects are being managed. The protests are largely targeted towards Total, raising concerns about displacement of people, environmental damage, destruction of natural habitats, pollution, and the like. Um, the companies have responded by introducing some compensation schemes that are also subsidized by the government, although many view these as insufficient. And the protests underscore the tension between economic development and the rights of local communities, pushing for more inclusive and stakeholder-led resource management. The increased access to information has been facilitated by civil society organizations and the media, and these have empowered Mozambicans to demand greater transparency. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative was launched in Mozambique in 2012, and it has helped to promote transparency in the extractive space. So there is some optimism once the insurgency has calmed down. But in conclusion, despite these ongoing security concerns, Mozambique continues to improve its transparency with the Extractive Industries Transparency Index, playing a significant role in fostering public discourse on resource allocation. Thank you very much. I will now turn to Dr. Uba Cordero, who will present the case of Uganda.
Thank you, Angela, for a wonderful contribution and for overlaying whatever we're going to be doing today. I am very grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this text. I am learning a lot, just reading several chapters of it. Now I'm going to talk about the chapter that I wrote which is the case of Uganda. So, my chapter examined the potential negative consequences of oil discovery in the Eastern African country of Uganda that has one of the largest offshore oil find in the last 20 years. And some commentators have referred it as El Dorado of gas and natural and oil, mineable oil. So in doing this research, what I found out interesting was the level of depth in terms of policy prescription that the Ugandan government has put forward as regards to um, the oil industry, and they have incredible capacity as well because the government in power and our government led by Museveni is very adept at things of this nature. But regardless of the capacity and know-how that they do have, they still suffer a lot of neo-patrimonial, which is ruled by just giving rent-seeking and elite favoritism among elites of Uganda. So despite of the presence of capacity and know-how and a lot of examples to learn from, uh, there's still a chance that Uganda will still also follow the paths of other countries that have been cursed with resources rather than blessed with them. So So one of the most important points that I wanted to make in this chapter was that while oil is it's going to increase Uganda's GDP, which is gross domestic product in terms of numbers, um, most oil countries tend to not follow that up, especially within the African space, with improvement in HDI, which is Human Development Index. So there's just going to be a lot of money in the economy, but not substantive improvement in quality of life. But this is partly due to the extractive nature of oil as a resource, that it really needs very little or less human power and less development on land. And you can really do it with a high technology and high efficiency machines that do not require a lot of people in it. So what that means is that oil is non-inclusive. It's a non-inclusive resource that really depends on the focus of the governments of these countries to expand the rents that it gets from the oil resource to the rest of the society. And if the government is captured by an oligarchy or a class of ruling elites that are hell-bent on maintaining power or distributing these oil rents for themselves, then you have more money in the economy, but really limited development in terms of quality of life for most people. And that's one of the risks that my scholarship was indicating could happen to Uganda. So this cast, therefore, is possible because of neo-patrimonial system that makes Uganda particularly vulnerable to such causes. And the neo-patrimonialism is just a political system that is present in most of the world, but has been particularly featuring in post-independent Africa and other Asian and Latin American countries, but mostly in Africa, where the political elites assume that the resources that belong to the country are theirs. They personalize them for the needs that they think is important. So this personal connection and patronage becomes more important than formal institution, hindering the checks and balances that we expect will capture excesses of political actors in this situation. And in an environment of neo-patrimonial politics, there is often an elite class that can be self-serving and might want to continue staying in power because they have these rents, as Angela had already talked about, Mozambique, that keeps them desiring less taxes from the people and therefore limited accountability, but more money altogether for political bargaining. So that's one of the things that I found out. And it's not like a completely determined outcome. It's possible that there's hope that Uganda could transform itself, but the recent political history in the country indicate further closing spaces of democracy and increased authoritarianism within the republic and an entrenchment of NRM, National Revolutionary Movement government. So it's not indicating an opening political space. It's also not indicating an increased level of accountability on the political elites. Even as Uganda experienced such a shocking increase in number, population increase, as well as which majority are young, under 17. So that's one internally. In terms of a regional implication for Ugandan's oil find is that Uganda could disturb to its benefit the existing arrangements of power in the East African region. More, I would say East and Central Africa, which has predominantly been dominated by Kenya and sometimes Tanzania. And with Uganda's oil fund, which means more money and more leverage, they could question already existing power balances that often disadvantage them as a result of being landlocked. So Uganda will be pushing to have more say in East African community that they have never done before because they have been culprits of their geographical position. And they have done that already. In the chapter, I indicate how the Kenyans kind of wanted to use the Ugandan oil to their advantage to build infrastructure in some regions, that northern frontier region that has been historically neglected. And the Ugandan uh, kind of read between the lines and found that this was not to their advantage and pivoted. So their gas and oil pipelines were built through the Tanzanian expansive landscape because it was cheaper and it was more of what they desired rather than what the Kenyans wanted. So, in general, what I was finding was that the success of Uganda's development will depend on its ability to effectively manage the challenges and opportunities presented by oil industry. And in Uganda, we find an economy that's ready in terms of human capacity and know-how, but that is still kind of challenged by the practice of politics, neo-patrimonial, and the desire for Museveni's government to continue staying in power. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker will be Dr. Michael Ohene Abwage, who will be talking about Ghana.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, thank you, Angela and Uba. So I'll be talking about the Ghana case, and the Ghana case is about the petroleum management regime and its challenges and opportunities. I wrote this chapter together with Dr. Michael Ogby, and I'm not sure he's here with us. But basically, what the chapter sought to do was to examine the regime that governs the nascent petroleum industry in Ghana, and to make the case that it is very robust. It's a robust regime. However, in spite of the fact that it's robust, the regime does not achieve what it was created to achieve. And so, while the discovery of oil in Ghana was greeted with euphoria and optimism, as Ghanaians were positive that the petroleum revenue would greatly boost the country's economy. Now, the country's strong democratic credentials largely inform the optimism. And Ghana is one of the great cases in Africa in terms of democratic development. Is cited as one of the best cases, right? And so because of that, people thought that, well, Ghana would do better in terms of managing its newly found oil. And not just that, also the oil was found in 2007. And in 2007, you would agree with me that there was a lot of awareness about the resource curse. And so for the country to strike commercial oil in commercial quantities at the time, what people thought was that, for the awareness about resource curse, Ghana would do far better than countries like Angola and Nigeria. And also not just that, also in the extractive industry, Ghana had an impressive record in terms of managing the resources. And so people also thought that because of the history that Ghana had in the extractive industry, Ghana would do better in terms of managing the oil that was found in 2007. But aside that, others also raised concern about Ghana's democracy being able to withstand the perils of the resource curse, since empirical studies suggest that oil can have a corrosive effect on democracy. So, but then what was the response of the Ghanaian government? Guided by the experiences of oil producing countries like Nigeria and Angola, and also the euphoria and the optimism and the reservations, guided by all these things, the government responded by creating what I would say a very robust um, regime to govern the management of this newly found resource. So, but then the after building this regime, what we have found out is that unfortunately, what we expected the country to gain out of that exercise, the country hasn't gained that because when a country such as Ghana, which is cited as one of the, like I said, best cases in Ghana in terms of democratic development, uh, a country that is was guided by, like I mentioned, the euphoria, the optimism, the reservations expressed by people at the time that it found oil, and a country that responded by building, a robust regime to govern this newly found resource. One would have expected that this would translate into development, for develop the kind of development that all of us can see. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. And before I touch on why this has not been the case, I would like to examine, talk about a few of those laws. I'll mention two of those laws that the country enacted to govern the oil that was found in 2007. I mean, just to make the case that indeed the regulatory framework which was put in place is indeed robust as the chapter makes the case. Now, the first and probably the most popular legislation is what is known as the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. And what the act does is that it sets the framework to regulate the allocation and management of revenues obtained from petroleum production in Ghana. And it just not just that, also the law, there are two types of funds that the law creates: the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, and these funds are what collectively they are called the Ghana Petroleum Funds. But the name of the two funds, the specific names are the Heritage Fund and the Stabilization Fund. Now, what do these funds do? Now, these funds were created to ensure that revenue accrued from the petroleum is used prudently, so that a percentage of the petroleum revenue is allocated to these funds to promote what is popularly known as intergenerational equity and fiscal stability. And also the government made arrangements to ensure what also is known in Ghana as local content and local participation. And what does local content and local participation means? What it means is that the government took steps to ensure that Ghanaians were actively involved in the exploitation of this new resource, so that, I mean, you don't have the situation where you have foreign companies just drilling this oil and taking everything into the Western world where they come from without the country really gaining anything from. And that is what has happened in the extractive industry. And so they wanted to avoid that. And so the law, the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, set up these two funds to make sure that the money that we get out of the petroleum, we put some of them in these two funds. And so you can tell that this law is a very important law. And if the government was to comply fully, then of course things should happen better than what is happening now, which many Ghanaians are not happy with. The second one is what is known as the Petroleum Commission Act. And now what the Petroleum Commission Act does is it's established what is called the Petroleum Commission. And what the commission seeks to do is to promote what I mentioned, the local content and the local participation in petroleum activities. And so an LI was passed, LI legislative instrument was promulgated, which defined what local content specifically is. And if you permits me, the definition of local content is the quantum or percentage of locally produced materials, personnel, financing, goods, and services rendered in the petroleum industry value chain, which can be measured in monetary terms. And so, and also to ensure that there's local participation in the oil and gas industry. So for a firm or an oil company to qualify as a Ghanaian or indigenous company, it must have at least 51% of its equity owned by a Ghanaian, with 80% executive and senior management position and 100% non-management and other positions occupied by Ghanaians. And so among other things, among the local content and the other things that I've mentioned, the government was also interested in ensuring that there is what we call the technology transfer to Ghanaians through training, research, and development. I mean, this is also part of if you local contents, local participation, because when, of course, we know that a lot of these firms will be foreign-owned firms, and the Ghanaian government wanted to ensure that the Ghanaians are taught how to do the drilling, how to manage all the machinery, so that in the event that they own these firms in the future, or they have complete ownership of the industry, they will be able to control or be able to do to drill without any challenges. And so you can tell that this law was also very important. In fact, it even goes beyond to protect. A commission was formed, and which was to ensure that the government, the commission, what the commission was supposed to do was to ensure that the government was using the revenue prudently. And then this commission was even protected from interference from the government, so that, for instance, the Minister of Energy does not have any power to interfere with the work of the commission. Quite clearly, this is a very robust, I can't mention all the legislation, but from the two that I've mentioned, you could tell that the government really took lessons from the resource cases around, for instance, in Angola, in Nigeria, and also the concerns raised by Ghanaians. The government really acted prudently in this respect. But then after all these things, beautiful laws, then we Ghanaians are still complaining that they don't see the kind of development that they want to see, coming out of these newly found resources, and so what we did was to find out what really is the case. Why is it the case that even though we have all these beautiful laws to govern the newly found resource, yet we are not seeing the kind of development that we want to see? And what the first thing that we found was the problem was that most of these laws actually have what we call discretionary provisions. And so they allow the powers that be to get away with certain things without really complying fully with these laws. And so these discretionary provisions allow for non-compliance, and that is number one. Number two, what we also found, which was for us that what we actually focus on, was that there were almost no citizen participation in the how the revenue is managed. So what I mean by there's no citizen participation. So for instance, let's say the money that the government gets from the oil, the government decides to go to a community to build a hospital or to build whatever for them. The government does not seek input from the people. They just decide unilaterally that this is what they're going to put out for the people. And oftentimes the people, what they do, the people really, that's not what the people want. And often, and sometimes too, you see that the government has when the government presents its report, you see so many projects mentioned, and sometimes you can't even find the projects. And the government says, well, it's used this amount of money to do this project or that project. So a lot of shady stuff going on, so like Uba said, unfortunately, even in a country like Ghana, where we have all these beautiful laws, you find out that you have people in power who see this as a private property, and then they use the money that they, that is accrued from this newly found resource. They use them for their own political parochial interests, and so it is sad that even one of the best cases where we were expecting that by this time we say, well, Ghana was able to avoid the resource scarce. You can't really answer this question because, to an extent, Ghana put in place all the laws that were necessary to avoid the resource scarce. But then the laws are not enough. You need the people in power to really do what the laws require them to do. And that is what is missing in the case of Ghana. And it doesn't matter which political party is in power, whether the NDC or the NPP, which are the two largest political parties, whichever is in power, they take advantage of the laws. They do not comply fully. And so in the case of Ghana, quite difficult to answer the question. Has Ghana avoided the resource cares? So avoided, but not fully avoided, because the laws are there, but we're not really seeing what we expect to see a country that has avoided the resource curse. We would expect them to see, of course, we want to see development. We want to see the government complying by the laws, but these things are not happening. So that is the case of Ghana. You know.
Wow, thank you so much. I think we can move to the next slide and we can begin our question and answer portion of the session. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and that way the panelists will be able to see them, and I'll verbalize the questions that come through. I have a few questions to start. Thank you so much to each of our panelists. I really do appreciate you. I wanted to know about the social impacts, such as displacement or inequality, associated with resource extraction in each of the countries that you highlighted. I think there was some touched upon, but I would like to dig a little bit deeper on both Ghana, Mozambique, and Uganda.
Can you take it again? What the question?
Sure. The question is, what social impacts, such as displacement or inequality, have been associated with resource extraction in those countries?
Yep. Okay, so I can start. In the case of Ghana, the oil was found in a region called Western region. And what has happened in the Western region is that, um, well, so you have a situation where foreign companies with expats are moving into the region, and so housing is going up, and they are pricing out the locals, and they're complaining in terms of, so that is with the oil. In the extractive industries, for instance, in terms of gold, there is a place called Obuasi in the Ashanti region of Ghana, and when you go to Obuasi and you see what has happened, a lot of people had to leave where the mining goes on, and there are problems with the rivers. Their water bodies have been polluted, and a lot of social problems out of the mining in Obuasi. And for a long time they've been agitating for these foreign firms to really pay some money to them for the impact of the mining in these communities, and nothing has happened. So in these places, these are some of the impacts. Western region, the locals are complaining because they've been priced out of the housing market. They can't, and so yeah, there are problems in these communities where you have drilling, you have mining going on in Ghana.
Okay, I will talk briefly about the Mozambican case. The Mozambican case is peculiar in that, well, I don't know if that's really peculiar. Think of it like Alaska. So the place Cabo Delgado, where the displacements are occurring, is far removed from the political center of the country. So because there was already a history of marginalization and isolation, the government has not been as responsive. It's only been responsive in as much as the revenues from the gas find are now at stake. But if we were to look historically at how social displacements have been addressed in the past, there's not much optimism that much will change. And um, most of the relief that's being provided to the displaced communities is through the international, like global system in its fight against terrorism, for example, as well as with local or more regional security measures, like particularly in the Southern African development community. I do know that the government of Botswana sent a number of troops to the Cabo Delgado region to help with, provide aid as well as to provide some security to the Cabo Delgado region. But one thing that you find is that the vulnerable communities are actually at the mercy of the international community as opposed to getting any help from the government themselves. Right.
I'm going to talk about Uganda. Um, it's a very interesting case where the oil has been found. It's an Albertine lake, which is next to Lake Albert, which is at the border between Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. It's an area that is of great significance in terms of its unique natural habitat and tropical forests as well as animals that are endangered that are found in that place. But it's also the homeland of the Banyoro people, and the Banyoro have a very long history of state formation. They have a kingdom that dates back to around 1500. And in Uganda, most the nation state of Uganda is built up around those kingdoms which come before it, but the most dominant one is the Baganda kingdom. And the Banyoro have not always been friendly to the Baganda kingdom. And so there's an assumption that the new regime, the regime of NRM, is kind of it's marginalizing them by using resources from the Lake Albert region to facilitate development projects in central Uganda, where the Baganda Kingdom is located. So that's one feeling of marginalization. The second is speculation on land rates, which is happening, and most of the residents of that region are getting swindled off their land, most of it ancestral land, by dubious land speculators from the city spaces in Uganda, and more often connected to the government of the day, and suggesting that they live in places that are much drier and not where economic activities that they do don't happen. They can't grow or keep animals. So that is this. It's so grave that there's a documentary made on this stuff um, that shows how people have been displaced only to find themselves homeless.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
interesting. I would love to get that title so that we can add it to our research guide.
It's lost on my head, but I'm gonna send it to you, okay?
Thank you. That's great.
Okay.
Dr. Gapa, I wanted to follow up to your last answer. I'm curious about how international actors like multinational corporations and foreign governments influence resource extraction in these countries. If you could talk about that a little bit more.
I mean, corporations and countries go to places where they've got strategic interests. Even if you look at the United States, where it gives most of its aid, it gives most of its aid to countries where it tends to benefit, whether through more access to natural resources or more access to some type of financial economic gain. So foreign policy has always been a game of economic, strategic, military interest, and this is nothing new. Just the fact that natural resources are arbitrarily distributed around the world makes some regions just arbitrarily more resource rich than others. It creates an incentive for multinational corporations as well as more powerful governments to want to fill in those vacuums and extract as many resources as possible. And usually it's because of that destabilization occurs. Yeah, so I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. I guess there's another question in the chat that I do want to get to. It says, are there any examples of countries whose citizens have had meaningful input and benefit from resources? And I think that dovetails nicely with another question. Does the Ghana case debunk the notion that strong institutions can mitigate the resource curse? I wonder if you could speak to that, Dr. Obagwe.
Yeah, let me first speak to the question about the Ghana case. To an extent, yes, we have these strong institutions, but then what is strong institutions without the strong, if you like to use Obama's word, strong man, right? I mean, the strong institution. Obama was saying we need strong institutions, not strong men, right? But what is strong institutions without, if you like, the strong men? I mean, if the men and the women are not willing to do what is right, then that's the foundation of the strong institution. It's people that form these institutions, right? And so we have the parliament, we have all these laws passed by parliament, we have but then if the people who are entrusted with the powers of the state to make sure that these laws are complied with are not really doing what is expected of them, then to an extent, one can say that, well, having strong institutions is not enough. You also need to have the people that have, I mean, the will, to do what is right, and so to an extent, I would say yes, strong institutions do not necessarily mitigate the resource scarce. They do help. Like I said, in the case of Ghana, of course, I mean, having those beautiful um, laws, it helps because at least we have something to hold government accountable to, for government to do what is right. I mean, so now you go to Ghana when people are aggrieved, they have, they can tell the government, look, you're supposed to do this and that because that is what this and that say, right? But if there was nothing, then in fact, it's even more difficult to have that kind of conversation. So it's a good start to have those strong institutions, the beautiful laws, everything is a good start. But it's not enough. You also need the to have the people that are willing to do what is right, and that is the only piece that is missing in the case of Ghana. Perhaps I mean if we, to do a comparison, of course, Ghana's case is far better than the Nigeria's and Angola's case, and so, but that is of course not enough when compared with countries like Norway, who are Norway is doing far better in terms of their resource exploitation and using that to build generational equity, and Ghana is not there yet. Good starts, but strong institutions not enough. That is what I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. Unfortunately, the other cases, because I had already covered them in previous publications. I've done work on Botswana and I've done work on the Royal Bafokeng Nation. So those are two widely cited success stories of citizens that have benefited from their natural resources. But one thing that you find in Africa in general is that and I think it also encompasses the Ghana case, is that strong institutions tend to reflect more of the elite political culture rather than the mass political culture. So, social movements on a popular basis, that's a relatively new thing where citizens are coming together to protest against their governments. I know in the case of Kenya, that's recently happened. In Nigeria, that's recently happening. But civil society tends to be relatively weak in Africa. So whenever you hear of a success story in Africa, it's usually, for a lack of a better term, benevolent dictators. So I think that's one framework in which to understand the regional politics. Yeah.
Well, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. If anybody wants to know more, the panelists' emails are listed on this slide. And of course, the book is now available. So please come to the library and check it out so that you can read all about it. I also want you to please watch your emails for the research guide and a link to the recording that we have here, as well as additional information. There's going to be a playlist with music that you can listen to that relates to this topic. And I want to say thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. On behalf of Miriam Library, we thank you all and we will see you in the library. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
so much for hosting us, Stephanie. How do we get out?